Anyway, for anyone who's watching this, it was an amazing karakia. Beautiful loved it. Um, welcome to the meeting. Welcome, Dave. Welcome, Councillor Bell as well. Thank you for joining us and a few more staff. We are ready to go. The first of all, there are no apologies to note. The declarations of conflicts of interest. Are there any from councillors? Nope. There are no registrations for the public forum, no matters lying on the table. Confirmation of agenda. I need a mover and a seconder to confirm that the agenda be confirmed with and without alteration.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I do actually have a note that Emily will be providing another attachment on her item 2, just as an amendment to that. I think that can be happening procedurally. So moved by Councillor White, seconded by Councillor Mitchell. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Confirmation of public minutes of the previous meeting. Does anybody have any notes? Be happy to move the second. Thank you. Second, thank you, Councillor Copeland. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carried. Cool. That moves us on pretty efficiently to item 1. We've got the Farewell Bio Special Plan Monitoring Report by Gabrielle and Anita to present. Awesome. Thank you. I'll hand it over to you guys.
Okay, so I'll just do a brief intro, then I'll hand it over to Gabby. But essentially, this is our last monitoring report for the Grow Wellfire monitoring report, and in it, we actually wanted to really highlight all the great things that actually have been achieved. We've done some structure plans, we've done some mode shift, we've done the joint housing action plan, and it just shows you the strength of that Grow Wellfire partnership. So I'll hand over to Gabby to discuss that in more detail.
Yeah, so it's just this report is just really just to note the context, that the achievements that we've achieved over the last since the spatial plan was adopted in 2021. So it's been quite interesting going back through the years and seeing all the things that we have achieved. I think as a team we're quite proud to see what's come out of the spatial plan and to have it all in paper. Kind of really hones in on that, those achievements. And as Anita said, we're kind of at that crossroads now where we've kind of met all most of those key focus areas that the partnership governance group initially put forward for us to achieve. And so now it seems like a right time to look forward and reprioritise our focus areas and to relook at resetting a monitoring report going forward. So that's what we will discuss with the group at the workshop following this, which is why we just noted that the May monitoring report is the last one in this current format. But happy to take any questions on either of those aspects.
Cool, appreciate it. And just to commend as well, it is always nice to take stock and reflect and see what's worked and what hasn't. And it was sort of good reading to reflect on the stuff that has been done, which was, great credit to you. I also appreciate that, these agendas, there's a lot of noting, so I feel like it's an opportunity for councillors to ask questions about how this work has been done and, just more general discussion. If it's not as contentious in order to move forward. So I'll open up to questions.
Can we just talk a little bit about Ladies Mile, because we just did this whole huge project and structure plan that was a lot of work and a lot of community input, and it looks like the first 2 cats off the rank already want to push the boundaries. How do we protect that work that was done?
I think also in terms of the structure plan, I think the densities that we always said were a minimum, so it has been designed to be flexible on those densities. And I think what's really helped us is the fact that we've had a structure plan. So when we're negotiating with those developers, we can say these are the outcomes that we want for our community, but also in the same respect, that is difficult with the Fast Track Approvals Act.
Yeah.
It's an act outside of our control.
Yeah.
But we have, I know that in particular P&I, there's a whole cross-council team that is working very closely with those developers to really push those outcomes that we were trying to achieve via the structure plan into reality.
Yeah, look, through the chair, I think this is the reality of Fast Track. We need to advocate as best we can in our submissions in relation to what we've done, why we've done it, how it's been supported by the Minister very recently in relation to getting what we have achieved. And just to put our best foot forward is what we need to try and do, and the Fast Track process will take its course from there.
Thank
I think the key thing with Ladies Mile, we didn't have the structure plan. I think the conversations about what those developers were doing and the conversations with those developers would be quite different.
Okay.
Yeah. So as Anita said, it gives some structure for the discussions with them.
Yeah.
So it's really clear, well, if you want this to progress this way, here are the things that we want out of it. And a lot of the things they've done are aligned with the structure plan. Obviously, there's some things where they want to go, beyond what the district plan, rules are currently allowed. It's the Fast Track. But a lot of what they've done have been guided by the structure plan.
Yeah, and through the chair, having the structure plan and then having that streamlined planning process happen so quickly after, that's helped a lot.
Yes,
too.
okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Kurt. Yeah, along similar lines, I've had 3 phone calls recently from people in 5 Mile or adjacent to that, and they are concerned very much about the parking issues there. So I see that and we're going to be having a parking management plan going forward, but then last night I listened to this Queenstown Cableway update. Given that the structure plan is about minimums to achieve provide increased population and housing and other services, but that one of the major concerns that's been expressed by QLEC and others is the impact on traffic. And therefore the issue about parking with the low amount of parking required and being provided by developers. What approach are we going to be taking to that particular issue going forward? Yes, we can advocate, but are there things that we should be emphasising through that as we go forward in the next phase?
And particularly in the spatial plan and the structure plans and even the plan changes, what we're highlighting is we need to either facilitate developments that make it easier for public transport or mass rapid transit. Again, similar to Fast Tracks, car parking from minimums have been removed from our district plan. So essentially our role is to encourage, but is also to enable developments that facilitate that type of development. So when we're working closely with the developers, we're highlighting those issues, but also with NZTA too. How do we get those alternative forms and the Otago Regional Council? How do we get those alternative forms that encourage people to get outside of their car, knowing that a lot of people still have cars? What we know from overseas is if you have it set up before that people develop, they're more likely to use it. So, we have a long way to come, but it's something that is that land use transport integration is fundamental to all our plans right through to plan changes.
Yeah, the other things to take into consideration through the chair are, the rules we have in place relating to having public transport systems in place to be able to address the adverse effects of development, having traffic assessments being requested through large development, including Fast Track, to say how is this going to work without systems to support the movement of people. When we have a network that is difficult to manage, we need to understand those details before consents are granted, and certainly comment on them for Fast Track applications that come in various areas to highlight the EPA issues that are there and the requirements for developers to manage those issues prior to getting resource consents.
Yeah. Although obviously the issue that Dave and I have been working through, and that we're going to have a bit of a chat about how to continue that in the workshop, is there's network impacts and there's local impacts. And so where, Fast Track individual developers can be made to deal with local impacts from a transport perspective, the network implications are much more difficult and doesn't seem to have been anticipated in the way that the fast track system has been designed. Maybe it's a unique issue to Queenstown. We're unique in many ways, but I suspect it's exacerbated here because of the small area that all of these fast tracks and all of our growth areas are going into.
And I think so maybe when we get to the workshop, we could.
Yeah, there's no place for the mission.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions on this item? Thanks so much. Thank you. Can I get a mover and a seconder to, one, note the contents of the report, and two, note that this will be the last for around 5 or monitoring report in this format, revised reporting approach, and refresh priorities will be discussed at the Smart Growth Committee in the preceding workshop. Thank you, Councillor Mitchell, seconded by Councillor White. Open up the discussion. I just want to make one point that I think that, one of the nuances in this environment that we're in is that we're not leading on everything. There's DCs for the local infrastructure, but there's no DCs for highways, for hospitals, and for schools and education. And I think, our response so far with Fast Track has been really proactive. I think they've been really comprehensive responses, really well detailed from staff. I think we're all trying to, find a way to make it work. And I just commend the work of staff to really juggle all of these competing priorities and be adaptable in an environment that's quite undermining of proper process. So great job on that. And, we look forward to the messy, fast-paced future and the conversations that we see from them. Cool. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? Happy days. That is moved. Moving on to item 2, we've got the Joint Housing Action Plan updates. Emily is here at the table. I'll hand it to you. Welcome back.
Thank you, Sarah Koto. Thanks, Cody. We've got 2 main points coming through for this update here. So the first one is the annual monitoring report. Despite being an annual report, we've looked back over the past 3 years of the JCAT to provide an update across the period so far, and similarly with the monitoring report, thinking about what's been achieved in that time. The draft monitoring report will be published on the website, and it goes through, similar to the previous ones, provides an update on the actions and also provides an update on those measures. Following this meeting, we'll be building on this report to think about the priorities and the changes for the upcoming 12 months, and that will be looking at a bit of a refresh of those measures and the actions. So that's something to consider whilst looking through this report. The second part of the update is about the relationship framework agreement with Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust, and as noted, there is a small amendment that has been emailed through, so hopefully Councillor Smith, you've received that, but I can talk to the changes, and I've got a couple of printed copies here. But in summary, in clause 3.3 and 3.4, there's some additional wording about adding QLDC written approval as well as being consulted on for changes to the sorry, just one clause about when the if QLCHT, the Housing Trust, was to be wound up. So just talking through the changes overall about updating this relationship framework agreement. This is one of the key changes in clause 3.3 and 3.4. And essentially, at the moment, the trust is not able to be registered as a charity. And the reason for that is because there's a clause in the trust deed that says that if the housing trust was to be wound up, the assets would come to QLDC. But under charity law, it's required that the assets would go to another charity. So working with the legal team, we've come to a solution where instead we will require written approval from QLDC about where those assets will end up. So that's the main change from the RFA. There is another key change in that we are inserting the ability to put covenants on the land that the Housing Trust receives. At the moment, we already have an ability to put an encumbrance, and so the other main change that we're making is to put the ability for a covenant on the land, which again protects that land for QLDC to make sure that the land is used for community housing into the future. So it was a very quick summary of the changes. Happy to take any questions, and I do have a couple of printed copies of the updated version if anybody wants to see it.
The only thing, we will be taking the final relationship framework to full council for final on the 23rd of July.
Any questions?
Can you explain the difference between encumbrance and covenants?
Could I possibly hand that over?
Well, what we know is with the encumbrance is that affects the trust's ability to get financial to fully. So if there's an encumbrance, it affects the ability to get full finance. So we had the same issue that we talked to councillors regarding Job Street.
Yeah.
So what we have is we register a covenant, so it still gives us the protection that it's going to be used for affordable housing, but it's not, and it doesn't affect the trust's ability as much financially. So that was the key barrier.
Yeah.
So it's still having a protection on the title, but it's not to the point that it doesn't affect, because there's no point if we put an encumbrance and they can't then get a mortgage on that property to develop. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So we were trying to think of ways where we still have protection for our community, but then we still give the trust the ability to do it. So it's a finding balance. So ideally we put an encumbrance because it's a higher level of protection for us, but we think we can live with the covenant.
Yeah. One of the things that I just is worth noting here is that, and we're going to workshop this in the next session more in terms of what are our actions going forward. But one of the things that Nita and I talked about a lot when this report was pulled together was looking at the indicators. Basically shows that every indicator has improved except affordability. And so what does that mean in terms of the actions that are being taken, that the things that, you know, in other parts of New Zealand would indicate that housing affordability should be improving. That's what we want to workshop a little bit more in terms of what our priorities are in the workshop, but also that's part of, we are going to be refreshing the JCAP, and part of that is part of what we want to talk about is how do we get really focused on the things that are going to move the dial, because we've done a lot of things and a lot of these indicators have moved, but housing affordability hasn't. In fact, it's gone the other way.
Okay.
So I just wanted to, because, you know, if you're looking at those indicators, that was what stuck out to me, is that they were green except the overarching one.
Thank you. With that, could someone explain the background to the change on page 60 in the agenda and page 1 of Appendix B, where the number of houses, so I think that's page C, so page 60 of the agenda. Yeah, page 1 of the agreement, where it says that the target is for 1,000 affordable homes, which previously was said to be 2028, is now said to be 2038, which is rather pessimistic. What's the background to that? I'll just add to that. I would have thought that it might be useful to, yes, have a later date, fine, but have a higher number. But fill me in, please.
So this change is referring to the agreement with the Community Housing Trust for the Community Housing Trust to deliver their 1,000 affordable homes. So just clarifying that it's not the homes in the district.
No, sure. Just says, yeah. Thanks.
Sorry, yes. Essentially, the original number was agreed by the Housing Task Force, but then it was subsequently updated. And I think that was by the Queensland Lakes Community Housing Trust. I don't know if it was with the task force too, was it? I don't think so. Yeah, so we just updated those. But obviously that's just a minimum. Ideally, we'd want to do more. The issue that we have now is we don't actually have the pathway for inclusionary housing. So we're reliant on the historic deeds, and that's why in the workshop we're really focusing on just, you know, getting as much, everything that's outstanding or is coming up to be due moving forward. But once we have sorted those deeds, unless we can then renegotiate via fast tracks or other arrangements, there's no pathway for us to get any inclusionary housing.
So when that target was set for the Community Housing Trust, it was set in, sorry, it's a question, I mean,
Yeah.
am I interpreting correctly? It was set in the context of we thought we would get the inclusionary housing tool through, this was before the district plan change was attempted. So it was set with that in mind. If we could get a tool like inclusionary zoning, then we 1,000 affordable houses through this scheme by 2028 would have been quite achievable.
Yeah.
But because we don't have that tool, that's why the time frame has been extended.
Yeah, okay, so, I won't venture into comment, I'll just keep a question. So that, do you therefore think, given the indicators for affordability, is essentially going the wrong way, or the market taking us that way? From a policy perspective and attempting to influence government, would it not be potentially more effective to have a more ambitious target that then policy has to be put in place to enable us to deliver that target? Otherwise, nothing's going to change.
I don't necessarily think that this target stops that from happening. I think what the data shows is that we are in a really unique situation.
Yeah.
So if you look at for the likes of Christchurch and other places where more housing has actually resulted into more affordable housing. In our situation, more housing is not making a difference, and that's really backing up our advocacy to government. So we have sections that come online, and then 20 minutes later they're sold out. You know, we're meeting a demand that's not just our residents. We're meeting a demand from Aucklanders, from Australians, from all around the world to come here. We've also seen, since the change of the $5 million house, what we've seen from our discussions with developers, we've seen a lot more demand in that product. So we're seeing a shift from, maybe lower residential to mansions type development. So we are really impacted by the market. So what this shows us is, we are different, and more housing is not going to result in affordable housing. And also what we're seeing is the market is not delivering affordable housing.
Also, I think we could set that as a target for ourselves in our measures.
And
the relationship agreement with the Housing Trust. So putting it on them when we have given the mechanism to get the stock into. Yeah, that's actually maybe that's the way that it could be approached.
Sure.
Yeah, we could build on our own joint housing action plan target and say, yeah, this is what we want to achieve.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Councillor Smith, do you want to elaborate or ask questions?
Yeah, thank you. Just reinforce those comments from Anita that we're in a very different situation here, and that but just was interested in a couple of things. So just given that it overlaps with the goals of the Housing Trust and the relationship agreement, and firstly, just to reinforce that the work of the Housing Trust's amazing and they do a great job, but we have had a slightly uncomfortable situation where they have put letters of support behind things that we might not, as a council, might not necessarily support. Is there anything to address how that might be dealt with in the relationship agreement or with in moving forward, and how do we align our goals with theirs, I suppose, or that they align theirs with ours, I suppose, more to the point, and that maybe their support of those things is more qualified.
No, there's not in the existing relationship agreement. This is something we've been dealing with the trust, but I think the issue too is we don't want the trust to lose out necessarily on an opportunity to get affordable housing. And while, I'm just trying to think, sometimes it's not ideal. I don't necessarily think the trust are supportive of it. They're just looking at, hang on, there's an opportunity to maybe get some affordable housing.
I'm happy to elaborate because I brought this issue up at the last Housing Trust meeting, being that one of the councillor appointees there. And I said the same thing. There's some developments that are very consequential to the long-term health and future of our district, and putting their badge on top of it, it is a really poor look, I think. And to elaborate with Anita's point, they were like, well, we'd rather be in the tent than out of it, so we just sort of put it on everything. And there was definitely a level of discomfort that I think we need to address as council, to go back to and say, hey, look, if we're going to be supporting the work that you do, we sort of need some reciprocity, and we also need to sort of get on the same page on this kind of thing. So it highlights that there's a need for a conversation for sure. I appreciate that they've taken a consistent approach, but in this environment, I don't know that it's particularly helpful, because it can confuse, I guess, the mana that the trust holds, with giving credit to developments that aren't necessarily in the best plans of what council's looking to. So it's a well-made point, and I have raised it previously, so it's something to keep an eye on. Did you have any further questions?
No, I mean, only that, housing affordability is one of the tranches of the regional deal that's under discussion. So fingers crossed we can make some progress in that front. So.
Thank you, Chief. Just a question, and if this is outside of your technical expertise, I totally understand. But you mentioned one of the changes to the agreement is to tweak some wording around the trust being able to be listed as a charity. And correct me if I'm wrong, they aren't able to be because of the vested interest in the land that QLDC has across them. The change would be that QLDC through written approval, and I sort of missed the rest of the point there. So if you could just expand on how that's different, or what the written approval QLDC would then have to be in a position to, and are they going through charity?
So they are in the process of attempting to register as a charity. So yes to that part of the question, and to elaborate on what this change is. So at the moment, in the situation that the housing trust is wound up, the assets would come directly to QLDC. The change is to instead require that if the housing trust is wound up, that QLDC needs to provide written approval about the recipients of those assets. So instead of directly receiving the assets ourselves as the council, we would be providing written approval of who that recipient would be. And in practicality, the council is not a affordable housing provider. That is why we established the trust and facilitate the start of that trust. So in reality, if the housing trust was to be wound up, it would be likely that the council would instead look to be providing some other entity with those assets to manage and run affordable housing in any case. So although at the moment QLDC would directly receive those assets, in all likelihood we would then be passing them on to a third entity anyhow to manage those, as it's not part of council core business. So the change really is to, instead of directly receiving them, to be approving the recipient straight away rather than receiving them and then passing them on.
And then on top of that, we are in the process of all new land we now receive has a covenant protecting it to be used for affordable housing in perpetuity. So then we will be retrospectively putting those on other land. So then we've got sort of another layer of protection.
But would the written approval from QLDC to transfer of the land have to go to another charity? And if it didn't, is that part of the constraint?
So I understand that to be able to register as a charity now, the recipients need to be a charitable trust. So we would be required to do that for the trust to be a charity. I mean, however, though, if the trust was to be wound up, I don't know if that limitation would actually carry on to apply. I'd need a lawyer to clarify that.
We have a lawyer in the back that wants to answer.
In order to be a charity, you have to ensure that if you're wound up, that all your assets go to another charitable purpose. Coming back to council, we're not a charity, so it needs to be able to go to another charitable purpose, but we're sort of retaining some control through it requiring approval. And it also strengthening by having covenants or encumbrances on the title, sort of also dictating how that land can be used in the future. Is that
No, thank you, appreciate it. And I understand that part of it.
Yeah.
I guess the question is if it's all hypothetical, sort of wasting time anyway, but
Yeah.
we did that sometimes around the table. But like I'm saying, if the trust was to wind up, I think you only then need to give written approval to transfer those assets to someone, and there's not another charity in the space of delivering affordable housing. So we say, well, the written approval will be coming back to council. Would that potentially be an issue, or
Not.
is it a loophole in the charitable like registration?
I don't think so. I think the key issue for them was it coming back to us, and so I mean that's also why it's going to be on board to be directing it to a new entity, but subject to our approval. So it may be that they need a new housing trust set up. Yeah, it's a bit hard to know with the hypotheticals, but the key thing is we've got control over where it's going, but still in accordance with charity, it's going to be with charity.
So I think your question is, what if there is no existing charitable trust that it can go to? What happens then? Can we get it back if there's nowhere for it to go? No, we could set up a trust.
Yeah, we would set up.
Like we set up the Queenstown Lakes charity, we set this trust up,
Yeah.
we could set up another trust.
Exactly, that's what,
Yes.
that's what I've seen happen before when I was working in the UK. This happened, the housing trust, well, it was required to fold.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the local authorities collectively set up a new housing trust that the assets from there, that all went to.
I feel it just changes the landscape about investing assets into that entity from a council's perspective now, potentially.
Is that an old hand, Quentin, or a new one?
Wasn't new one, and I was just, it was on that similar point, and I mean, I took the point that obviously this comes to council, and obviously it should because it's a significant shift, but I do wonder whether we've thought about all those possible fishhooks associated with this, because I mean, this was always the assumption that the trust was built on, that while it was a separate entity, it was acting on our behalf, and that things could come back to us if it folded up. So this is changing that significantly. I mean, I do wonder in 50 or 100 years' time, if affordable housing was no longer an issue, you know, if and we're living in utopia, then why wouldn't we want the land to come back to us, to council or to the community for another purpose that we could repurpose it? So anyway, I mean, it's an interesting, it does change things a bit, as Councillor Heath said. You know, it was always built on the assumption that we just had a fallback. So
yeah, it might be worth bringing Julie into the discussion when it comes to full council, because I think, you know, it's easier to talk to her, and she can be an advocate on what the dynamics are like in practice. This is from a legal perspective.
Yeah, so this is kind of a rhetorical question, but when we get to that conversation, I think it would be worth exploring whether it's actually the charitable act, or is it just a preference of the housing trust? Because I'm involved in another charity, and that's exactly the provision that they still have, that their assets would transfer to the council, to a council. So
yeah, so through the chair, we've been advised that the charity register won't accept it, but the council doesn't have to agree to this change. But we could say no and see where they get to in retaining charitable status.
Thank you. And when it goes to full council, we'll have all of that analysis and advice.
Just
various options.
on question commenting to my, I'd just like to understand why they need to be here. Or kind of like what's the benefit in being a registered charity?
I think there are two key benefits that I understand from my discussion. The first one is essentially a reputational sort of benefit about it looking good, that they're a charity, and that is related to the second point about attracting further funding. So I think that she mentioned that potential American donors in particular, something to do with the legal setup there, but in terms of trying to attract philanthropy and about people coming in who are wanting to donate and to contribute to the community, if the trust is set up as a charity, they're much more able to attract that funding because of, sorry, I don't know the detail about that, but there's something to do with that about attracting funding.
So we'll do all that, that analysis will be included. I suspect it's got something to do with the proportion of investment from the golden ticket visa holders who can do philanthropic donations to be the recipient of a philanthropic donation.
20% of their
Yeah, so 20% of the 5 million can go to philanthropic purposes, not invested into businesses. So it could be something there.
Actually,
Could be. So that'll all be included in the.
because I understand the tax break.
Yeah.
That's all changing as well. So.
I can expound on that.
Councillor.
What you're actually referring to is 501c3 status. 501c3 status is charitable status in the United States. That makes available the funding from anything from the Ford Foundation, Gates Foundation, even endowments. But if you don't have 501c3 status, you are considered a private entity. And so that's the first question that gets asked is, you want money from us? What's your 501c3?
Right.
And it's very easy to get.
Well, helpful context. Thanks for your input. Cool. I'm happy to move this along. If I can get a second.
One more point. I mean, I think it's well, land that's gifted to the trust is one thing. I mean, I'm just conscious that we did just hand over all our aged housing assets to the trust too, which were distinctly councils and did have a monetary value. That, to be fair, if this was occur before that, I don't know whether I would have done that and made that move and transferred those over, because those assets could otherwise have been sold or realised if they were no longer needed. So we've literally just in the last few months sort of handed those over to the trust, and it would be unfortunate to now effectively lose control of those by in effect. So anyway, I think there's the point being, I think what we should take from this is I think there will need to be a bit further discussion with council to understand the full ramifications of this before we bring it to full council.
Yeah, so I'm wondering then, when following those conversations, whether this agreement may need to be viewed again, and that if the trust does fold for whatever reason, and it could be good purposes anyway, not necessarily because it fails, but it needs to change status, that council would then still have some control over what that trust, the charitable entity that the assets were transferred to. So could we think about that going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I do think I'm picking up from this conversation that there needs to be a workshop type arrangement with the housing trust with councils, so it's free and frank discussion. We can talk about these dynamics in an open forum that isn't reliant on a formal decision. I think it's the healthiest way to daylight a lot of these concerns, because I do think, and I think it's timely, to be frank, because having sat on there for the last 4 years, it's important that we all understand the nuances of what the trust does. And they get a touch base from us in terms of everything. So I will bring it back. I'm happy to move if I can get a seconder to one. There's a big lot of things to say. Sorry. One, note the contents of this report. Two, note that the Joint Housing Action Plan has been jointly developed and has been implemented by partners from the Growell Whaiora Partnership, specifically Kāinga Ora and Te Taupapa Kura Kāinga Ministry of Housing and Urban Development and Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust. 3, note that the Joint Housing Action Plan monitoring report will be published on the QLDC website and provided to the Growell Whaiora partners. 4, note that the work program and priorities will be discussed at the Smart Growth Workshop on the 7th July 2026, immediately following this committee meeting. 5, note that the proposed changes to the Relationship Framework Agreement with the Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust. And 6, note that the draft relationship framework with the Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust will be presented to full council for approval on the 23rd of July 2026. Do I have a second? Thank you, Mel. Councillor White. All those, do we go for a discussion? Does anybody want to make any discussion points? No, happy to bring it to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? Motion carried. Thank you very much. I now have a resolution to exclude the public for the next part of the formal meeting. Can I get a mover and a seconder to do that? Thank you, councillor Copeland, and a second from councillor Mitchell. All those in favour? Thank you.